Hello, dear friends and listeners of the channel. Today's story is titled, After Signing the Divorce Papers, My Mother-in-Law Booked a $45,000 banquet to introduce the new daughter-in-law to the whole family. When it was time to pay, she panicked and called me. Why did you block my card? Late autumn in Chicago. The sky was leaden gray, and the wind from the lake carried the smell of dampness and decaying leaves. From around the corner came the familiar city hum, mingling with the sounds of passing cars, the recognizable melody of a big city. I sat by the window, watching raindrops stream down the glass, recalling my life. That life where I believed that patience and hard work would conquer all. My name is Elena Ellie Covington. I was 33 at the time. I'm a financial director. For over 10 years, I'd worked in finance, serving as CFO for a large construction materials sales company. My job was to look at numbers and ensure that cash flow never stopped. They say financiers are dry people, but I understood that behind every figure lay someone's dinner, someone's paycheck, the heavy sigh of a person who'd taken out a mortgage. I met Dave Sullivan at a business reception. He was 2 years older than me, charming, and, most importantly, he knew how to listen. He spoke of his dream to open his own distribution company for construction materials, to run an honest business, making reputation his main capital. I listened and believed him. Perhaps it was because at that age, I had begun to fear loneliness, to fear dinners in an empty apartment, to fear the dreary rainy nights when the drumming of drops on the roof tore at my heart. One weekend, Dave took me to meet his parents. Their home was in a quaint suburban town outside Chicago, an old but well-maintained 2-story house. Dinner consisted of hearty beef stew, homemade dumplings, mashed potatoes with dill, and a plate of pickles. His mother, Carol Ann Sullivan, as she served me food, asked sweetly, "Ellie, you're a financial whiz, aren't you? So you'll be able to help Dave a lot, won't you?" I took it as a compliment then and replied, "I'll help however I can. The most important thing is harmony in the family." His father, Robert Bob Sullivan, was a man of few words. He simply poured me a cup of hot tea, and his kind gaze conveyed that he wished only peace in the home. Dave and I got married 6 months later. When he said he wanted to open his own firm, I was the first to support him. Dave named the company Build Right Partners. It sounded solid. Many praised us, saying what a harmonious couple we were. And I was happy, because every woman wants to believe in a little romance. But a company thrives not on romance, but on capital and discipline. Dave had the drive and market connections, and I had my savings, money my parents gave me before the wedding, and a profession related to risk control. I contributed 60% of the initial capital. Dave's contribution consisted of his efforts and contacts. On paper, we were 2 co-founders. In life, I built the entire structure: expense approval processes, cash flow planning, standard contracts, credit limits. I even handled negotiations with banks myself. I understood that when it came to money, an honest person had nothing to fear, but everything had to be formalized on paper, because money doesn't recognize family ties. Dave became the face of the company. He wore crisp white shirts, smiled moderately, shook hands firmly, and every word he spoke sounded convincing. I watched him leave for meetings, while I stayed behind in our cramped, month-to-month rented office, which was full of hope. In the early days, we were exhausted but happy. I stayed late over reports. Dave returned late. After closing deals, we'd meet in the kitchen, barely managing to eat a bowl of hot oatmeal and then dive back into work. Once, I joked, "When you get rich, don't forget the merits of this old saucepan for oatmeal." Dave laughed. "How could I forget? You're my treasurer." I didn't know then that this joke would later become the pretext for them to demand from me as if I were a real safe. Because from that moment on, I was not just a wife. I was the foundation upon which others ascended. My husband's family had not yet fully revealed themselves. Carol Ann loved to tell neighbors that her son had married a smart and capable woman. His 2 sisters, Sarah and Maria, occasionally visited with flattering speeches. "Ellie, you look so chic," Maria would say, glancing at my handbag as if appraising it at a market. Before I could feel awkward, Carol Ann would conclude, as if joking, "She's a smart one. That's good for our family." But if she hid her intelligence, it would be worthless. I would smile to smooth over the moment and chide myself for being overly sensitive. But you know, those words, light as a breeze, later turned into chains. Carol Ann had a way of asking questions while simultaneously probing the ground. She loved to ask about my salary, my bonuses, how the company was doing, if it was profitable or losing money. I tried to deflect, speaking in general terms, to which she would purse her lips. I ask so I know how to plan. A woman in the house should be a good manager. Otherwise, money comes in one door and goes out the other. Saying this, she would look directly at me, as if the other door was me. Robert Sullivan was different. He often put the best piece of fish on my plate, refilled my tea, doing it a little awkwardly, as if afraid of displeasing his wife. Once, when Carol Ann was recounting how the neighbors' lives had improved after their daughter-in-law arrived, he couldn't hold back. A daughter-in-law is also a daughter. Don't speak like that. She shot him a glance, and he immediately fell silent. I watched this scene, and my heart ached. I used to think a quiet and kind father-in-law was a blessing. Later, I realized that kindness without a voice sometimes becomes an excuse for injustice to flourish, and my husband's sisters, how should I put it? They weren't poor to the extent they couldn't afford dinner, but they always lacked something to brag about. Sarah complained that her husband worked in construction, and their money was unstable. Maria talked about her son starting kindergarten soon, and the big expenses involved. After complaining, they would look at me. That gaze wasn't a direct request, but it put me in a position where I was expected to understand. At that time, I was still naive. I often brought them gifts, a box of good chocolates, fruit, clothes for my nephew, thinking it strengthened our relationship. Carol Ann was pleased, praising me for being understanding, but her praise sounded like a seal of ownership. This is how a daughter-in-law should be in our house. Only Nick, Dave's younger brother, was different. He always came home in dusty construction clothes, went into the kitchen, washed his hands, and asked me, "Ellie, aren't you tired?" This simple question made me feel like a person, not a money-printing machine. Once, Carol Ann chided me for not washing dishes as cleanly as girls from the countryside. Nick calmly said, "Mom, if that's the case, I'll wash them tomorrow." Carol Ann's eyes flashed. No need to spoil her. Nick fell silent, but as he passed me, he quietly muttered, "Don't pay attention to her." I heard it and wanted to sigh. In that house, kind words had to be whispered, and insults shouted at the top of their lungs. I started noticing a habit in Dave. In public, he was decisive, but at home, he avoided conflict. Whatever his mother said, he replied, "Yes." Whatever his sisters said, he smiled. When I remained silent, he would take my hand under the table, as if signaling, "Don't escalate." He often said, "Just bear with it a little longer. Mom's getting on in years." I tolerated it, but when you tolerate too long, people start to think your patience has no limits. One evening, Carol Ann set a large table and invited relatives. I was late, held up at work. As soon as I entered, she said, as if joking, to the whole company, "Here's our daughter-in-law, the financial director. Everything is on schedule for her, like for the president." Everyone at the table laughed. I smiled too, but my heart felt cold. Were they laughing out of joy, or because they knew I couldn't retort? When dinner was over, Maria took me to the kitchen and said confidentially, "Ellie, when things really take off in your company, tell Dave to help us out a bit. After all, his family is our family too." I froze. These words sounded familial, but behind them lay an unstated rule they had already established for themselves. My husband's and my assets were the assets of his entire family. I swallowed and said, "I'll talk to Dave." Maria smiled confidently, as if she had already won. That evening, Dave asked me, "Did Mom and my sisters say something? What upset you?" I answered directly, "I feel like I'm constantly being scrutinized. They ask about money, about my salary, about the company. I'm not used to that." Dave sighed. "Well, that's my family. Try to understand." I asked, "And to what extent should I understand?" Dave remained silent, and that silence reminded me of the saying, "A smart man is silent for 3 years, a fool for 1 hour." Sometimes, People act foolish, not because they don't know, but because they think silence will solve all problems. I still tried to calm myself, telling myself, okay, I'll be softer, more accommodating. But the softer I became, the more prickly words grew around me. And I began to understand a simple truth. There's nothing wrong with a family having rules. What's wrong is when those rules are used to force someone to bow their head without the right to raise it. After a few months of working at the company, Dave and I had days when we could breathe a little easier. Not that we were splurging, but money started coming in more steadily, and debts no longer hung over our heads. Before I could celebrate, Dave said, "Ellie, we need more working capital. Suppliers demand quick payment. If we delay, we'll lose the goods." I understood this. Cash flow in this industry is like water. If it stops for a moment, the whole mechanism halts. After some thought, I decided to open a credit card with a high limit in my name. I officially arranged everything at the bank, signed the documents, and set clear rules. Any expense had to be confirmed with a receipt. Whoever used it had to inform me, and at the end of the month, a reconciliation. Dave listened and nodded. "Of course, Ellie, don't worry. I'm running a business, not some free-for-all." Initially, I only gave Dave a supplementary card so he could easily pay at client meetings. I kept the main card with me, as I was used to controlling everything. For the first few weeks, Dave used the card very responsibly, sending receipts from restaurants and for gas expenses for business trips. Everything was within reason. I even congratulated myself on making the right choice. Husband and wife make a great team. One guards the treasury, the other goes to market. But one evening, Dave said a phrase that made me wary. "Mom says she's not getting any younger, and she feels awkward asking for money for small things. Maybe we could get her a supplementary card so she doesn't feel humiliated?" I looked at him. Not feeling humiliated, that's hard to refuse. I tried to stick to the rules. A card is fine, but with a small limit. And Mom needs to say what she spends it on, so I'm aware. Dave smiled. "Oh, how much does she really need?" A week later, Carol Ann called me with an unusually sweet voice. "Ellie, are you busy?" "I'm at the jewelry store. I wanted to exchange an old necklace, and I'm a little short. Could you transfer some money?" Hearing a little, I didn't press for details and told her to pay with the card. She laughed. What an understanding daughter-in-law I have. A little more time passed, and Sarah and Maria also started asking for money. At first, they didn't ask directly, but with hints. "Ellie, I booked a hair appointment, but I didn't bring my wallet," or "My son is sick. I need to pay the doctor urgently. My husband will pay you back tomorrow." Each time, Dave looked at me with a silent plea. I felt trapped between rules and the so-called family harmony. I agreed not because I was foolish, but because I feared being labeled greedy. In life, sometimes people fear not spending money, but gaining a bad reputation. And my husband's family lived more by reputation than by reality. Thus, the third and fourth supplementary cards appeared. 4 names under my management: David, Carol Ann, Sarah, Maria. I thought, well, a little from each. I can control this. I set a monthly reminder for reconciliation. Asked Dave to remind his mom and sisters to save receipts. Dave would answer, yeah, like a robot. But life didn't follow an Excel plan. Carol Ann's expenses were no longer a little. She bought a silk suit for a wedding, new shoes appropriate for her age, a handbag so people wouldn't look down on her. Once, she even told Dave directly in front of me, I went to a meeting of the local women's league. Everyone was boasting about gifts from their daughters-in-law, and what was I supposed to come empty-handed? A disgrace. Dave turned to me with a conciliatory smile. Ellie, just make mom happy. These are just small things. Sarah started regularly going to day spas. She would send me photos of face masks and manicures with the caption, Ellie, this is to look fresher. Otherwise, my husband will start looking at others. Maria became obsessed with online shopping, and couriers arrived at their house every other day. One day, arriving at my mother-in-law's house, I saw a mountain of boxes in the corner and asked, Mom, did you buy something big? Carol Ann nonchalantly replied, Oh, those are your sister's little things. You're the financial director. What's there for you to worry about? The phrase, what's there for you to worry about, was like salt in a wound. Whose money, if not mine? I started checking the statements more carefully. Not to catch them, but to protect the family and company budget. I saw many small but frequent expenses. Expensive coffee shops, cosmetic stores, upscale supermarkets, and even a bill from an upscale seafood restaurant on the very day Maria posted a photo with the caption, "Treating myself." I asked Dave, "Did you remind everyone to save receipts?" He replied, "Ellie, but it's family. Don't complicate things, or all the joy will be gone." Joy or rules. At the company, I still had to pay employee salaries, settle with suppliers, collect debts. I never delayed a paycheck, because I understood that these were not jokes. But at home, my money was being spent like water, and they considered it normal. The scary thing wasn't that they spent a lot once. The scary thing was that they developed a habit, wanted it, took it, liked it, bought it, and I'll pay by default. I tried to talk delicately. At dinner, I gently said, "Mom, sisters, let's reconcile the card expenses at the end of the month, so it's easier for me to keep track." Carol Ann tapped her chopsticks on the table and smiled, but her eyes weren't smiling. "Our daughter-in-law is a big shot, isn't she? I'm spending pennies here, and she still needs a report?" Sarah chimed in. "Ellie's our financial expert. She counts every penny." And Maria delivered the final blow. "Maybe it's because you don't have children. That's why you have time for such trifles." I froze. They used the topic of children to shut me up. It hurt, and I couldn't argue at the dinner table. Dave, at that moment, simply put a piece of fish on my plate, as if saying, "Eat and be quiet." That night, I lay facing the wall, listening to the rain drum on the roof. I remembered the saying, "Once a liar, always a liar." Ice began to form in my heart. I still loved my husband. I wanted to save our family. But I understood that if this habit didn't stop, it would sooner or later consume both the company and our marriage. It's easy to talk about children, but difficult to live in such a situation. In 3 years of marriage, I hadn't avoided the topic of motherhood. I also dreamed of a child. Sometimes, seeing mothers with strollers in the park, a lump would form in my throat. But I was busy with the company. Dave left early and returned late. Our schedule was a tangled ball of yarn. We thought we still had plenty of time, until the insistent questions began, like a downpour. First, Carol Ann asked sweetly, "Ellie, are you taking your vitamins?" Then, "Well, any good news?" And then Sarah joined in, "Ellie is still young, but perhaps work is so exhausting." Maria added with a smirk, "You'll be chasing money. Be careful the stork doesn't fly by." I was uncomfortable, but I endured it. I told myself that elders worry about grandchildren. It's normal. Only this normal increasingly took on the tone of an accusation. I myself suggested to Dave, "Let's go to the doctor, get checked out." "I don't want to guess anymore." Dave agreed then. "Yes, let's go." Mom's driving me crazy with her questions. We chose a good clinic, did all the tests. I sat in the corridor, waiting for the results, and my hands grew cold. Dave sat next to me, but his eyes were glued to his phone. I didn't blame him. I understood he was busy, but at the moment when a woman most needs her husband's support, a phone screen sometimes makes her feel utterly alone. The doctor spoke directly, without beating around the bush. "There are no serious health problems for either of you. For you, Elena, your cycle is disrupted due to stress. And for David, it's an irregular lifestyle, lack of sleep. The doctor advised us to change our routine, reduce our workload, and observe for a few more months." I breathed a sigh of relief. At least no one was to blame. I intended to calmly tell my husband's family about this, to say that the doctor advised us to rest more and not get stressed. I thought they would calm down, but I forgot one thing. Some people don't need the truth. They need a reason for accusations. That evening, Carol Ann cooked hearty beef stew. The smell of bay leaf and pickles filled the kitchen. As she ladled the soup, she asked, "So, what did the doctor say? Are there problems?" I honestly answered, "They said we both just have stress. We need to get our routine in order. Nothing serious." I said this to reassure everyone, but it turned out I gave them a reason to twist everything. Carol Ann put down the ladle and looked me up and down. Her voice was slow, didactic. "If you're not sick, why aren't you having children? Perhaps a woman who doesn't take care of herself, drinks cold things, doesn't sleep at night, works like a man, and ruins her health. I was stunned. I didn't think a mother could say such a thing to her daughter-in-law at the dinner table. Before I could answer, Maria smirked. Mom's right. A girl should take care of herself. Otherwise, she'll just chase money, and when it's time, the train has left the station. Sarah added, Ellie, I'll tell you honestly, if you can't have children, at least be accommodating. Our lineage must not die out. The word accommodating hit me hard. I looked at Dave. I waited for him to say at least one word. Just one word. Mom, sisters, don't talk like that. But Dave lowered his head, put a piece of bread on my plate, and quietly said, Eat, Ellie. I didn't need bread. I needed a wall to protect me. Robert Sullivan sat, flushed. He opened his mouth to say something, but again fell silent. In the end, he just sighed, stood up, and went out into the yard. The scrape of his chair on the tile sounded like a stifled sob. I watched him go, and I felt sorry for him. Sorry for a kind but powerless man. At that moment, Nick returned. He had just put down his helmet when he heard Carol Ann's words, which I remembered for the rest of my life. A woman who can't have children must compensate with money. We didn't take her into this house for her beauty. Nick froze and looked at his mother. Mom, you're speaking like that. It's hurtful to Ellie. Children are a matter of fate. It doesn't always happen when you want it to. Carol Ann's eyes flashed. What do you know? Meddling in adult matters. Nick didn't argue anymore. He looked at me for a second, and in his gaze, I read an apology for the whole family. Then he silently went to wash his hands and didn't sit at the table. Nick's silence at that moment warmed me more than Dave's silence. At least one was silent from powerlessness, the other from fear. That evening, I sat in front of the mirror for a long time. I looked at myself, the same me, only my eyes had dark circles and my shoulders were slumped. I asked myself what I had done wrong. I worked hard, helped build the company, took care of the house, followed all traditions, and just because I didn't have a child yet, I was turned into a barren tree, into a person who had to buy her way out with money. They say words are like birds. Once flown, they cannot be caught. But in my husband's family, words were chosen to hurt me, not to please me. From that day on, every time I heard Carol Ann call out Ellie, my heart tightened, like someone who knows they're about to be struck in a vulnerable spot. I still tried to maintain peace, played the role of daughter-in-law, but something inside me changed. I stopped seeing their words as accidental slips. I began to understand that they were placing me below human dignity. And when a woman is cornered, she either breaks or learns to stand tall, even if she has to stand alone. After that dinner, when Nick stood up for me, my husband's family didn't become softer. They simply changed tactics, stopped saying you can't have children directly to my face, and resorted to hints, digs, and sarcastic smirks. And you know, a needle is small, but if you prick many times, blood will flow. Carol Ann began to perceive my earnings as her due. One day, she called me at work and said in such an everyday tone, as if ordering vegetables, Ellie, tomorrow is grandfather's memorial gathering. I've invited almost 20 relatives. You organize the table, make it lavish, so people look and envy. I sat in my office, a report on outstanding debts before my eyes, and her words in my ears. My head was spinning. I quietly asked, Mom, should I cook at home or order from a restaurant? She replied, Ordering is expensive. A smart daughter-in-law should know how to manage. If a woman in the house can't set a table, what is she capable of at all? She said the phrase, what is she capable of at all, softly, but I clearly understood what place was reserved for me. I did everything. I went to a wholesale club for groceries, ordered several prepared dishes to save time, hired a kitchen assistant. I didn't mind the effort. I minded the feeling of being ordered around like a servant. I looked at my phone with endless reminders, then at my hands, smelling of onions and garlic, and I wanted to laugh. I was once called a financial director, and here my worth was measured by how beautifully I set a table for guests. Many relatives gathered at the memorial. Carol Ann wore a dark velvet dress with pearl beads. As she poured tea, she boasted, This is all my daughter-in-law. She organized everything. She's so capable. The women looked me up and down and nodded. Yes, with such a daughter-in-law, life is a pleasure. I heard the word pleasure and felt bitterness. Pleasure for whom? For those who benefit, or for those who must bear the burden? Sarah and Maria also came that day, showering me with compliments, but didn't lift a finger to help. As we cleared the table, Maria whispered in my ear, "Ellie, you did great today." The table was superb. Mom is pleased, which means she'll be kinder to you. And if she's kinder, it will be easier for you to live here. I froze. It turned out that to live easier in this house, I had to buy that right with labor and money, not with good relationships. I looked at Dave. He, as always, was at his best, chatting with relatives, smiling, pouring drinks for guests. Someone praised him. "Dave, you're lucky to have such a wife, a real gift from heaven." Dave smiled and said, "Yes, it's all thanks to her." I heard thanks to her, and there was emptiness in my soul. Thanks to her, but that's like taking a loan and never paying it back. In the following days, the company entered a tense period. I had to negotiate with the bank, prepare documents for a short-term loan to purchase a new batch of goods, and deal with overdue accounts. Employees looked to me as their support. I adhered to my principles: salaries on time, transparent dealings with suppliers, documents in order. I knew that in business, any murky scheme would sooner or later backfire. But as soon as I, tired, returned home, Carol Ann would call. "Ellie, next week Sarah's daughter is getting married. Think about how much we should give so it's respectable. We can't embarrass ourselves." I asked. "Mom, but Sarah herself decides how much to give." Carol Ann snorted. "Whose family?" "Our family. Since you entered this house, you must care about its reputation." And again, I had to uphold their reputation with my money. I started to get tired, that kind of tiredness that sleep can't cure, a weariness from the constant pressure of keeping the company afloat, pleasing my husband's family, enduring reproaches about not having children. One dinner, I felt nauseous. I thought it was good news. I bought a test, but it showed one line. My heart sank. I sat in the bathroom and laughed at myself, my eyes stinging with tears. That evening, Nick returned. He saw me sitting at the table and didn't ask anything. He just opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, handed it to me, and quietly said, "Did you eat anything?" "I bought some pastries." I shook my head. Nick was silent, then added, "Ellie, don't overwork yourself like this. They say a fish rots from the head down, but I think if there's no love in a house, it also starts to rot." Saying this, he fell silent. I looked at this young man, and I felt both warm and hurt. Warm, because in this house, there was at least someone who saw me as a person. Hurt, because his kindness was too little to protect me from everything that weighed on me every day. Dave returned late. Taking off his shoes, he asked, "What's wrong with you? Your face is pale." I told him the truth. "I'm tired. I feel like I do everything, but it's not enough. Your family constantly needs something from me. I'm not a machine." Dave sighed and said conciliatory, "Well, just bear with it a little longer. That's my family. That's my mom. If there's peace at home, everything will be fine at work." I heard that, and everything within me collapsed. Peace at home meant I had to be silent, endure, and carry everything myself. And fine at work meant Dave would look successful to others. I turned away and looked at my blurred reflection in the window pane, and for the first time, I asked myself a question I hadn't dared to ask before. If this continues, when will I be able to live as a wife, not as a hired hand? After that conversation with Dave, I didn't cause a scene. I simply didn't have the strength to argue. I began to observe silently, as I usually observed cash flows in the company. If there's a deviation, there's a problem. But conclusions require evidence. Dave started returning later. But it wasn't the kind of late work I knew. It was more like avoidance. One day he returned, and his shirt smelled of a strange perfume, not the shower gel I bought from the grocery store. He said he had a meeting with an important client. They were in an air-conditioned office, and there was an air freshener. I nodded, not asking more questions. I didn't want to be the woman who searched her husband's shirts like a detective. But one afternoon, I asked Dave for his phone to call my sister, as mine was dead. Dave was in the shower. His phone lay on the table. I was just about to quickly dial the number, but at that moment, the screen lit up and a message appeared. Just a few words, but they made my hands go cold. "Are you on your way?" "I'm waiting." "Sender, Veronica." I froze, as if I had been switched off. They say women are suspicious, but I'm a financial director. I don't believe in feelings. I believe in data. So I didn't read further and didn't rummage through the phone. I put it back in the same place and went to put mine on charge. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. That evening, I watched Dave. He ate, but constantly glanced at the screen. I asked, "Something urgent?" He replied, "Clients are texting about work." The answer sounded smooth, like a rehearsed phrase. I looked at the bowl of soup and realized it was tasteless, like water. That night, Dave fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't. I lay listening to the fan, the distant hum of cars, and wondered, who is Veronica? If she's a client, why such a message? If she's an employee, why such a tone? I didn't want to be foolish at this crucial moment. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I didn't ask my husband anything. I chose another path, to check what I had the right and ability to check. Expenses. The company already had a clear policy: entertainment expenses with a limit, gifts with approval, business trips with reports. I opened the system and reviewed Dave's latest declared entertainment expenses. Several lines made me stop. An expensive restaurant, twice in 1 week, and precisely on the days Dave said he had a meeting with an important client. I looked at the time on the receipt, at the address, and then opened his work calendar. It said very vaguely, "Meeting with partners." No company name, no contact person, no meeting protocol. I called in Brenda Jackson, the chief accountant. I had hired her from the very beginning. She was meticulous, quiet, and principled. I didn't ask about infidelity. I asked about business. "Brenda, are all the supporting documents for these entertainment expenses in place?" Brenda looked at me, as if pondering, and then, putting down a folder, quietly said, "Ellie, lately David has been approving expenses strangely. He says, we need to be more flexible, eliminate unnecessary bureaucracy. When I ask questions, he gets irritated." I looked up. "How exactly does he get irritated?" Brenda hesitated. "He says that you, as the financial director, complicate everything and hinder his work." I heard that and smirked to myself. For 3 years, my bureaucracy kept the company afloat. But for someone who wants to spend money freely, rules will always be an obstacle. I told Brenda, "Please keep electronic copies of all documents, and for expenses where information is missing, make notes." I spoke calmly, but in my head, I was already constructing a risk profile. There were indicators, a trend, a motive. That evening, I went to my mother-in-law's house because Carol Ann had invited me for dinner. As soon as I entered, I heard her complaints. "Dave has been working so much lately. He's lost weight. As his wife, you should look after him. Otherwise, others will find a way to comfort him." She emphasized the word others, as if someone's invisible shadow already hovered in the house. Maria smirked. "Successful men always have many admirers. If a wife doesn't keep an eye on him, she'll lose him." Sarah added, "And anyway, we need to think, maybe it's fate. Our lineage needs an heir. If there isn't one, a man will look for comfort elsewhere." I listened to every phrase like the screech of a knife on glass. They didn't know I had just seen Veronica's name, but they had already prepared the ground to blame me if I lost my husband. It would be my fault. I didn't watch him. I didn't have children. Dave sat silent, as always. Only this time, I perceived his silence not as kindness, but as complicity. Returning home, I took a shower. Water streamed down my shoulders, but it couldn't wash away the cold in my chest. I remembered the saying, "An honest person has nothing to fear." If I was right, I had nothing to fear, but I couldn't allow others to chop down my tree. From that day on, I began to notice small things. Dave changed his computer password, started taking his phone into the bathroom, went out onto the balcony to talk on the phone in whispers. Sometimes, he would smile looking at the screen, then turn to me with his usual expression. These little things were like the small transactions on the card statement. Insignificant individually, but together they added up to a huge sum. A sum of betrayal. I didn't have final proof yet, but I already knew what to do next. Not to create a jealous scene, but to save the rest of my life. I no longer asked Dave any questions about Veronica. I knew that men of his type would find 100 ways to shift the conversation to, "You're imagining things." I didn't want to turn our home into a theater of war, giving my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law a new reason for gossip. I chose my path, the path of a person who had worked in finance for too long, slow, confident, and without emotion. One lunchtime, I left work early. Driving through the quiet streets not far from our office, I found a small studio apartment for rent, a modern building with an elevator, electronic lock, quiet. The room was small, a bed, a table, a small kitchen, and a window overlooking trees. I signed the lease in my name, paid, got the keys, and suddenly felt a huge relief, like someone who was drowning had finally found solid ground. I didn't make a big fuss about moving. I simply transferred a few sets of clothes, an old laptop, and toiletries. I told Dave that we had a new project at work, and I needed a place closer to the office to work late nights. He listened and simply said, "Uh-huh," without asking questions. His indifference only strengthened my conviction. His heart had long been elsewhere. My next step was not tears or complaints to friends. I started making backups. I logged into all corporate accounts I had access to, changed passwords on important email addresses, added two-factor authentication, and wrote everything down in a small notebook. I downloaded the company's articles of incorporation, certificate of registration, list of founders, and minutes of past meetings. I filtered financial statements, major contracts, credit agreements. I didn't take anything that didn't belong to me. I only saved copies of what proved my contribution and my responsibility. Then I moved to personal matters. The apartment we lived in was actually a gift from my parents before the wedding. They had said then, "Our daughter should have her own place. If anything happens, she'll have somewhere to return to." I laughed then, saying they worried too much. Now I understand. Old people may not know the laws, but they know life. My parents saw further than I did. I retrieved the folder with documents, the deed of ownership, the purchase agreement, the gift deed. Everything in the name of Elena Covington. I photographed, scanned, and saved everything to a hard drive and a cloud storage account that only I knew about. I also photographed all utility bills, which were in my name. I did everything so thoroughly that if someone later tried to prove it was joint property, I would just need to lay that folder on the table. After finishing, I made an appointment with an attorney. My brother Andrew recommended attorney Mark Thompson. He was about 40, spoke without unnecessary words, looked directly at you, one of those who grasps the essence on the first try. I met him in a quiet cafe. I didn't tell a long story. I laid everything out, point by point, like in a report. I contributed the majority of the initial capital. I acted as guarantor for loans. My husband shows signs of misappropriating company funds. The marriage is on the verge of collapse. I want to know what, in case of divorce, will be considered my personal property and what will be joint property, and what I need to prepare so I don't end up with nothing. Mark Thompson listened and asked several specific questions. Do you have documents showing capital contribution? Can the source of funds before marriage be proven? Whose name is on the apartment deed? Are the shares specified in the articles of incorporation? Who is the CEO? He didn't ask about feelings. He asked about what determined the outcome of the case. When I showed him the scanned documents for the apartment, he nodded. The apartment was deeded to you before marriage. There's a gift deed. By law, this is your separate property, but be aware, in conflicts, there's often psychological pressure. Don't sign anything impulsively. Avoid vague wording. I asked. What if my husband was siphoning money from the company? Mark Thompson replied, that's no longer just a family squabble. If there's evidence, misappropriated funds, transfers to personal accounts, purchases unrelated to business, that could lead to legal liability. But for everything, you need documents, clear movement of funds. You are moving in the right direction. I heard the words in the right direction, and a chill ran down my spine. Not from fear, but from the realization that from this moment on, I had crossed a line. The line between a wife who wanted to save her family and a woman who began to protect herself. Returning to the studio, I received a message from Carol Ann in the family chat. "Come for dinner this weekend. There's something to discuss." Attached to the message was a voice message nearly a minute long. The content was all the same. Hints about children, about a woman needing to care for the family, and the classic phrase, "What will people say?" I listened and turned off the screen. In my small room, to the monotonous hum of the air conditioner, I suddenly laughed. How long had I tried to live so that people respected me, while those people had never once asked if I was tired? In the evening, my brother Andrew called. He asked just one question. "Are you okay?" I paused for a couple of seconds and replied, "I'm learning to be okay." Andrew didn't ask further, only said, "Keep your documents safe and don't isolate yourself. If anything, call." I hung up. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't cornered. I was still hurting, lonely, I slept poorly, but in my head, there was already a plan of escape. And for a woman, perhaps just a path to salvation is enough for her heart to stop beating so frantically. I wasn't going to expose Dave in a fit of anger. I wanted to choose a moment when he couldn't evade responsibility by saying, "You're imagining things." And that moment came one evening in the middle of the week. Unexpectedly, a downpour began. Thunder rumbled as if someone were banging on a giant pot. Dave returned late and, entering the apartment, went straight to the bathroom, taking his phone with him. This habit had become the norm in recent weeks. I stood in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal, listening to the sound of water, and everything inside me grew cold. When he came out of the shower, his phone vibrated several times. I didn't snatch it. I simply asked calmly, "Are you having dinner?" "I made oatmeal." Dave replied, "I ate downtown." Saying this, he sat down and immediately picked up his phone to answer a message. A smile flickered across his lips so quickly that one might think I had imagined it. I put the plate on the table and sat opposite him. "Who is Veronica?" Dave froze for a moment, then composed himself and smiled tensely. "Were you reading my messages?" I shook my head. "I don't need to read. It's enough to see." Dave sighed. It was the sigh of a man caught red-handed, not one who regretted. He put down his phone and folded his hands. "It's not what you think." I interrupted him. "Don't say, 'It's not what you think.' I'm asking a direct question. Who is she?" Dave looked at me and replied, "An acquaintance." I gave a bitter laugh. "An acquaintance who texts, 'I'm waiting late at night,' because of whom you carry your phone into the bathroom and change computer passwords." I spoke in an even voice. "Is she connected to the company's money in any way?" This question made Dave's face change. He frowned. "What does that have to do with the company?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "Because I see strange expenses. Restaurants, gifts, purchases, and none of it relates to business." Dave jumped up. His voice became harsh. "Are you spying on me?" I slowly replied, "I am checking the cash flows of a company into which I invested my own money." "This is not spying. It is responsibility." Dave froze. Outside the window, rain drummed on the glass. I heard the beat of my own heart, but my face remained cold. I thought of the times I had been humiliated because of not having children, of the memorial service I had organized, of the reputation I had upheld with money, and of the name Veronica, which had flashed on the screen like a spark igniting our home. Finally, Dave told the truth, but in a way that acknowledged, trying to retain an advantage. "Yes, I'm seeing Veronica, but I'm so tired." "Ellie, you're always working, always about numbers, about rules." I was suffocating. I heard that, and my heart tightened. I wanted to scream. "Who made you suffocate at my expense?" But I restrained myself and asked, "And what do you propose?" Dave sat down, rubbing his face with his hands, as if performing a drama. "Let's separate. Civilly." The word civilly fell on the table like a piece of ice. I looked at him and laughed through my tears. "Civilly? After you spent company money on gifts for another woman? Civilly? After you allowed your mother and sisters to humiliate me in front of relatives? Civilly? After you remained silent, as if it didn't concern you? You mean an amicable divorce? Dave nodded. His voice was light, as if he were talking about changing his phone. Yes. Let's part peacefully. I don't want to humiliate you. I laughed again. Humiliate? I've already been humiliated enough. You just didn't see it. At that moment, Dave's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and quickly disconnected the call. I knew who was calling. I stood up, poured a glass of water, and drank from it to keep my voice from trembling. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with my attorney. You should prepare too. Dave frowned. Why an attorney? If it's by mutual consent, we'll just sign the papers. I looked at him with a long gaze. Do you think I'll leave empty-handed? Dave remained silent. Annoyance flickered in his eyes, not because he regretted the pain he had caused me, but because he feared I would no longer be so accommodating. Before I could reach the room, a message appeared in the family chat. A voice message from Carol Ann. Her voice was shrill, like a screech. Ellie, I'll be direct. Our family needs an heir. If you can't have children, know your place. Don't ruin my son's life. I froze, not from surprise, but from the fact that she finally said what she had long wanted, to kick me out, to make room for another. Dave heard it. He didn't snatch his phone, didn't reply. Mom, don't talk like that. He simply looked at me and said, flustered, Mom is hot-headed, don't take it to heart. I turned around. I won't take it to heart, I'll take it to court. Dave froze. For the first time, I said something he didn't know how to respond to. That night, I didn't sleep. I returned to my studio, opened my laptop, and organized all the copied files. I read every line of the company's articles of incorporation, every document for the apartment, every suspicious transaction noted by Brenda. I was no longer a wife waiting for her husband's return. I was a woman preparing to save herself. If this story has resonated with you, dear listeners, please give it a like to support the Quiet Evenings channel. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment below, because what happens next is a twist I didn't even expect. The next morning, I met with attorney Mark Thompson. He reviewed the documents and said concisely, "Don't fight with words, just act according to the law." I nodded. I knew that from this moment on, all words were meaningless. Only documents, dates, legal rights, and my own composure mattered. On Monday, at 10 a.m., I stood at the county courthouse. The air was damp after the night's rain. I wore a white shirt and black trousers, almost no makeup. Not to look pitiful or strong, but simply because I wanted to be composed, like for an important meeting. Divorce, for me at that moment, was no longer an emotional event, but a procedure that needed to be done correctly. Dave was a few minutes late. He got out of his car with a rather calm face, even with a hint of relief. I looked at him and smirked to myself. They say men are insensitive. In reality, many of them are insensitive only when they are sure they have nothing to lose. We submitted the documents and sat waiting to be called for an interview. My attorney warned me that with mutual consent, the main thing is to confirm voluntariness and agree on property and children. We had no children. As for property, I told myself, don't let emotions drag you into a verbal dispute. When the court clerk asked if our decision was voluntary, Dave immediately replied, yes, voluntary. I also replied, yes, voluntary. My voice was even, as if I were reading a financial report. At that moment, I didn't hear my heart beating. I only heard the monotonous hum of the ventilation and the tap of a pen on the table. We were asked about the division of property. Dave looked at me and said in a tone as if he were doing me a favor, "Say what you need. I don't want to hurt you." I looked him in the eyes and replied curtly, "I have specified everything necessary in the agreement. We will proceed according to the documents." Dave was slightly embarrassed. He probably expected me to be soft, upset, to cry, and he could play the role of the noble man. I didn't give him that opportunity. In my head, everything was clear. The main thing was not to argue here. The main thing was to dissolve the marriage on paper, so that later all disputes about shares in the company, about the misuse of funds, about the right to reside in the apartment, would not be distorted and presented as marital disagreements. I needed a clear legal line. Dave signed quickly, as one signs a service contract. I took a little longer. Not out of regret, but because I checked every single line. I once lived by the principle, simplicity is better than cunning. Now I understood that simplicity without vigilance is a trap. I could not afford to make a mistake in a single letter. Closer to noon, we left the office. The courthouse corridor was long and bright. Dave turned around and quietly said, "Well, that's it. Each of us has a new life." I nodded, saying nothing. As I exited the building, just as I stepped down the stairs, my phone vibrated. The family WhatsApp chat, which I hadn't yet left. Our happy family. The message from Carol Ann was the first. Long, with many exclamation points, a voice message was attached to it. I played it. Her voice was jubilant, like a wedding planner's. "Tonight, the whole family is gathering at a fancy restaurant. I've invited all the relatives. We'll wash away the bad juju and introduce everyone to the new daughter-in-law, Veronica." She proudly added, "We'll do everything like royalty. Let everyone see that by getting rid of the old." Our family immediately caught luck. Immediately after this, a photo of a receipt for a deposit, a decorated table with candles and flowers, and then a photo where Carol Ann stood next to a girl in a bright dress, her hand on the girl's waist, as if they had long been one family. Sarah posted a heart emoji. Maria sent a firework sticker. Relatives began to write en masse about how right this was. Messages flew one after another. I stood in the sun, looked at the screen, and a lump formed in my throat. Not because I was jealous of Dave, but because of how I had been turned into bad luck that needed to be washed away. For 3 years, I had been the daughter-in-law. I hadn't missed a single memorial, hadn't allowed a bad word to be said about my husband's family. And now they were celebrating as if they had gotten rid of a heavy burden. Amidst this jubilation, there was one short message that made my eyes sting. "Nick, Mom, that's cruel." Just 3 words. But in that chorus of exultation, they sounded like the only note of truth. I realized I hadn't been wrong about that man. Before I could catch my breath, Dave called. His voice was both hurried and irritated. "Did you see the chat?" Mom just blurted it out. "Don't take it seriously." I calmly asked, "What does 'don't take it seriously' mean?" Dave hesitated and said, "Well, we've broken up, let's save face." I laughed. "Face? I've been saving face for your entire family for too long." I hung up. I didn't argue. I just stood, looked at the stream of cars, listened to distant horns, and suddenly felt a strange calm. Perhaps because at that moment, I understood one thing. They didn't need my sorrow to win. They needed my silence to continue feeling justified. But from today on, I would no longer remain silent in the old way. I put my phone in my bag, walked back down the steps, and went to the parking lot. The sun was baking my shoulders. I started the car. My face was reflected in the rearview mirror, the same me, only my gaze no longer waited for anyone to turn around. I drove straight to my studio, closed the door, sat at the table, and opened my to-do list, like opening a ledger. They say everything has its time. My time had finally come. I returned to the studio, changed, washed my face. The cold water couldn't cool the pain in my chest. I suffered not because of love for Dave, but because I had been discarded like a useless thing, like a failure that needed to be washed away. Because my entire life, dedicated to his family, had turned out to be just a pedestal on which they ascended, leaving me below. I wanted to turn off my phone, but I opened it again. I looked at the family chat one more time, the table photo, the receipt. Carol Ann's jubilant voice, words like needles. "Wash away the bad juju. Meet the new daughter-in-law, so everyone can see." I put my phone on the table, took my laptop, and opened my online banking. On the screen, my main card and 4 supplementary cards linked to it were clearly displayed. Names of owners: Carol Ann Sullivan, David Sullivan, Sarah Sullivan, and Maria Sullivan. I straightened up. My hands weren't trembling. It was strange. I felt as calm as when I rejected a request for a non-business expense. I remembered the past 3 years, how every month I paid the statements, thinking it was for family. I remembered the humiliating words at the dinner table, and Dave's phrase, "Let's part civilly," as if I were the one causing problems. I told myself a simple thing. It's my card, and it's my right. I'm just taking back what belongs to me. I clicked on Carol Ann Sullivan's supplementary card. A confirmation window appeared on the screen. I looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and clicked block. Then Dave's card, block. Sarah's card, block. Maria's card, block. 4 confirmations, 4 clear actions, as if I had closed 4 doors. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt like I had cut the umbilical cord through which my blood was being sucked out. I sent another message to the bank. Restrict suspicious transactions on the main card. Done. I put my phone aside and brewed myself a hot cup of tea. Steam rose in a thin stream. The aroma was calming, but inside, it was still cold. I looked at the clock. It was just past 4. Around 6, my phone rang. Carol Ann's number. I didn't answer immediately. I let the phone ring 3 times, then picked up. Her voice was shrill, choppy, as if she were talking on the run. "Ellie, what are you doing? Why isn't my card working?" I calmly replied, "Mom, you were using my supplementary card. I blocked it, so it's not working." She screamed, "Are you trying to humiliate me? All the relatives are here. The restaurant is demanding payment." I took a sip of tea. My voice remained even. "This banquet you arranged to introduce the new daughter-in-law. I have nothing to do with it." She was silent for a moment, then burst into tears. "You're evil. You're destroying our family." I didn't argue, but said only one phrase. "I just stopped paying for you, Mom," and hung up. Not a minute passed before Dave called. He didn't yell like his mother, but his voice was hurried and heavy. It felt like he was more afraid of losing face than admitting his guilt. "Ellie, unblock the card. There are a lot of people here. This is a disgrace." I asked, "Whose disgrace?" Dave fell silent, then lowered his voice. "I'll pay you back tomorrow. Just turn it on for tonight." I gave a quiet laugh. "If you'll pay tomorrow, then deal with it yourself today. You're introducing a new daughter-in-law, not me." Dave started to get angry. "Don't push it too far." I replied, "I'm not pushing it. I'm doing what's right," and hung up as well. Only then did my hands tremble a little. But not from fear, from finally daring to say what I thought, without asking anyone's permission. Around 7 p.m., Nick called. He spoke quietly. In the background, I could hear noise, as if people were arguing in a large hall. "Ellie, I'm not calling to ask you to unblock the card. I just want to say that you did the right thing. It's chaos here." I listened silently. Nick briefly recounted what was happening. Carol Ann was arguing with the administrator at the reception, demanding they make an exception for her. Sarah and Maria stood nearby, red with shame and anger, blaming the new daughter-in-law, but also eyeing each other. Dave darted back and forth, pale, sometimes calling me, sometimes calling some acquaintances. Veronica stood aside, and even a thick layer of makeup couldn't hide her bewilderment. The relatives first made noise, then, feeling the tension, fell silent. And that silence was the most terrifying. Nick sighed. "Dad had to come. He's talking to the manager now. I can see how tired he is." Hearing about Robert, my heart ached. I wasn't angry at him. He was just a weak man. But it was this weakness that had, for years, forced him to clean up after his wife's and children's mistakes. I told Nick, "Take care of your father. I'll handle the rest myself." Nick quietly replied, "Yes, Ellie, take care." Hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. There was no malice in my head, just emptiness, as if I had finally shed a burden I had carried for too long. I understood that what hurt them most was not the loss of money, but the loss of the right to spend my money in front of everyone. The loss of the feeling that they were allowed everything, and someone else would pay for it. I looked at my cooled tea and thought, in life, everything has a price. I had paid for 3 years. Now it was their turn. That night, I didn't go anywhere. I drew the curtains, turned on my desk lamp, and watched my phone screen light up and go dark. Messages, missed calls, notifications buzzed like mosquitoes. I had blocked the cards. I had said everything. But people accustomed to living off someone else's patience, when deprived of it, begin to thrash about as if the air has been taken from them. I opened the family chat again. They were no longer sending banquet photos. Instead, there were fragmented messages, one on top of the other, the tone having shifted from jubilant to panicked. I read and smirked. It's true what they say, the truth always comes out. Only this time, the truth burst forth right in the lobby of the fanciest hotel. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I just wanted to cut them out of my life. But knowing Carol Ann, I understood she wouldn't quietly accept it. She would be furious, start inventing stories, paint me as the villain to maintain her image as an aggrieved mother-in-law. Understanding this, I decided to preempt her, using the truth. I went into a popular local community group on social media, where people shared life stories, discussed legal disputes, fraud, anything that could warn others. I wrote a short post, without insults, without accusations, just dates, facts, and evidence. I wrote, "This morning I divorced by mutual consent. This afternoon, I received a message from my ex-husband's family about a banquet at a hotel to wash away the bad juju and introduce the new daughter-in-law. Payment was tied to my supplementary card. I canceled its use as I am no longer associated with them, and the hotel demanded they pay the bill themselves." I attached 2 screenshots, the message from the chat and the receipt for the deposit. I blurred out personal information so as not to be accused of unethical behavior. I left only what proved the truth of the story. After clicking publish, I turned off my phone for a while. I didn't wait for likes. I poured myself another glass of warm water and told myself I had done everything I could. The rest was up to the readers. If they believed it, good. If not, I wouldn't argue. But life sometimes moves faster than we think. Less than an hour later, my phone started ringing off the hook. Old friends texted, distant acquaintances called, even some unknown numbers asked to confirm the story. I didn't answer everyone, only texted a few close ones. I'm okay, handling everything legally. I didn't want to make my problems someone else's burden. And then a video appeared. It wasn't shot by me. I wasn't there. It was filmed by someone from the hotel's patrons in the lobby. In the video, Carol Ann was shouting at the administrator, waving her arms. Sarah and Maria stood behind her, red with embarrassment. Dave was pacing back and forth in his perfect shirt, but looked as if he was about to faint. And at the end, the moment Carol Ann sank to the floor, clutched her heart, and burst into tears, screaming that I had given her a heart attack. The video went viral instantly. Every time I went online, I saw someone had shared it. The comments were varied. Some sympathized, some condemned, some scoffed, but one phrase was repeated most often. Want to live lavishly? Pay for it yourself, not at someone else's expense. I read and closed it. I didn't want to revel in schadenfreude, but what got to me was the appearance of Robert Sullivan at the end of the video. His slumped back, his trembling hands as he handed some papers to the manager, his hoarse voice. He looked like a man putting out a fire started by others, but without the right to scold anyone. Closer to midnight, Sarah called me. Her voice was no longer sickly sweet. It was sharp and harsh. "Ellie, do you think this is normal? My mother is humiliated. The whole family is laughing at us." I replied, "You have the wrong number. I am no longer your sister-in-law." Sarah gasped in anger. "But you gave her the card. You blocked it and set us up." I slowly said, "I blocked it, and that was the right thing to do. As of today, your family no longer has the right to use my money." Sarah fell silent, then changed her tone. "Did you post that online? You disgraced our family." I calmly replied, "I posted the truth with evidence. If you're ashamed, ask yourselves why your family is used to living this way." Sarah hung up. Less than 5 minutes later, Maria called. She spoke in her usual manner of shifting blame to the easiest target. "Ellie, don't be so cruel. They have a new daughter-in-law. Let people live in peace." I laughed. "Their peaceful life is for me to pay for them? I'm not stopping anyone from living. I just stopped supporting them." Maria hissed, "Watch out, this might come back to bite you." I quietly replied, "Everyone gets what they deserve. You reap what you sow." And I sowed nothing. Hanging up, I sat in silence. I didn't cry. I simply clearly saw the essence of the relationships I had tried so hard to preserve. As long as there was benefit, they called me a smart daughter-in-law, When the benefit ended, they started talking to me like an enemy. Towards morning, Dave sent a long message. He accused me of going too far, of trampling on the family's honor, of not thinking about his father, and ended with his classic phrase, "Tell me what you need, just don't make a scene." I read it and didn't reply, because I understood he still hadn't asked if I was hurt, if I was humiliated, if I was tired. He only worried about his family's honor. I put my phone down and looked out the window. Dawn was breaking. I heard the noise of a garbage truck, the rustle of a broom on the street. A new day was beginning, and I felt I had moved to a different level of my life. From that day on, I was sure of one thing: they wouldn't stop. And I was sure of another: I wouldn't back down anymore. If I wanted to live peacefully, I had to live rightly. By law, by conscience, and with self-respect. The morning after the hotel scandal, I didn't lie in bed feeling sorry for myself. I got up early, ate a sandwich, and drove straight to Attorney Mark Thompson's office. I clearly understood, if I won on emotions, they would say I was a vengeful woman. If I acted according to the law, they would have no arguments left. Mark Thompson looked at me and asked, "Are you ready to cut all ties?" I replied, "To cut them, but I don't want to be considered unscrupulous." He nodded. Then we proceed officially, with notifications, evidence, and official records. We drafted an official notice of termination of the right to reside in the apartment belonging to Elena Covington. The document specified the legal grounds, the apartment's address, the reason, and a reasonable deadline for vacating. I wrote not in anger, but coldly and clearly, as in an official document. The attorney added, "Don't call to avoid arguments. Send everything by certified mail. And it's best to draw up a certificate of service of the notice with a notary, so they can't deny receiving it." I did everything exactly so. Around 11 a.m., the notary and a courier arrived at the address. I stood at the apartment door with the documents, feeling a strange calm. Sarah opened the door. Seeing me, her eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" I didn't enter but simply said, "I've come to serve an official notice. Please accept it." Sarah tried to snatch the papers and tear them, but the notary said, "Whether you accept it or not, it will be recorded in the official record." Hearing the word record, Sarah froze. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of official papers. At the commotion, Carol Ann came out. She was in her house clothes, but a gold bracelet glittered on her wrist. Her eyes were red from a sleepless night. She looked at me like I was a thief. "Are you trying to throw us out on the street?" I replied, "I'm not throwing anyone out in one day. I am acting in accordance with the deadlines stated in the notice. We will transfer the apartment according to law." Carol Ann hissed, "By law? And where is your conscience? Your humanity?" I calmly looked at her. For 3 years, I paid for humanity with money, labor, and humiliation. Now, I prefer to pay by law. Saying this, I turned to the notary and signed the record. I didn't argue. I didn't want to turn the hallway into a scene. That same day, I met with Realtor Andrew. I told him directly, "The apartment is my personal property. People are currently living there, but they will vacate within the specified period. Please find a buyer who is willing to wait." Andrew nodded. "It's good that you're explaining everything honestly. It will prevent problems, but the price will be slightly below market value." I replied, "A small reduction is acceptable. I'm not selling because I urgently need money. I need to be done with this." 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared on the window. Carol Ann called me nonstop. First, she screamed, then she cried, then she shifted to a sweet tone. "Ellie, I'm old, I'm hot-headed, forgive me." I listened, but it no longer moved me. I sent her a message. "Please communicate with my attorney," Maria wrote. "Watch out, people will say you're heartless." I replied, "Let them say whatever they want. I live by the truth." Sarah threatened, "We won't let you get away with this." I took a screenshot and saved it. I had learned, words can also be evidence. Amidst all this chaos, only Nick sent me a short message that evening. "Act according to the law. I can no longer defend what is wrong." I read it and felt a lump in my throat. Not because I needed anyone's support, but because in a house full of shouts, there was one person who spoke softly and humanely. A week later, a pair of investors came to view the apartment. They asked in detail about the legal status, about the vacating period. I showed them copies of the documents, the certificate of service of the notice, and explained everything honestly. They exchanged glances and said, "Since you are so open, we believe you. We are willing to wait a little." I agreed. I was paying for a decisive break. On the day of signing the deposit agreement, Carol Ann found out and rushed to the realtor's office. Causing a scene, she screamed that I was selling the apartment out of revenge, that I had cut all ties, even bringing up the children again. I didn't argue. I simply asked my attorney to convey one phrase to her. The apartment is personal property. The transaction is legal. Any attempts to obstruct will be recorded. After that, she fell silent. Not because she understood, but because she was afraid. That evening, I sat alone in my studio, looking at the deposit agreement. I didn't feel joy, like winning the lottery. I felt lightness, as if I had shed wet clothes I had worn for 3 years. Perhaps some will say I was cruel, but I think love must have boundaries. Without boundaries, love turns into exploitation. I folded the documents, put them in a drawer, and locked it. For the first time in a long time, I fell asleep without dreams of sarcastic smirks at the dinner table. After the eviction notice and the sale of the apartment, I thought there would be a lull, but problems were not only at home, but also at the company. The place where I had invested 60% with real money, reputation, and sleepless nights. About 10 days after the incident at the hotel, Brenda Jackson texted me, "Ellie, I urgently need to meet with you." I scheduled a meeting at an unassuming cafe near the office. Brenda arrived pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She said, "I was forced to resign." I asked, "By whom?" She gave a bitter laugh, "David. And Veronica. She's sitting in the company now like she owns the place." He introduced her as the new financial manager. I clenched my hands under the table. I knew he would bring her in, but I didn't think so blatantly. Brenda continued in a trembling voice. He was making me sign off on questionable expenses. I refused. He yelled at me, said I was sabotaging his work, and told me to hand over my duties. I asked, "What did you hand over?" She replied, "Only the current files." But I saved copies of all the documents. I was afraid that if I gave everything, you wouldn't be able to prove anything later. She pulled a thin but heavy folder from her bag. Bank statements, receipts, records. Next to each suspicious expense was a note with the date and description. I opened the first page and saw regular monthly transfers to Veronica Hayes without specifying a purpose. Next, a bill from a car dealership, where she was also listed as the buyer. Then receipts from boutiques, expensive restaurants, hotels, all classified as entertainment expenses. I read, and my throat went dry. I asked Brenda, trying to remain calm, "Are you sure this is company money?" She nodded. "Yes, from the corporate account. Some transfers were made directly through online banking. I cross-referenced the dates when David was supposedly on business trips. They matched the dates of hotel bills for 2 people. I didn't need to hear anything more. Paper doesn't lie." I put the folder in my bag and looked at Brenda. "You did the right thing. I'll take care of the rest." Brenda lowered her head. "I'm afraid he'll blame everything on you. He constantly said you were too particular about the rules." I smirked. Rules are what keep a company afloat. Without them, money leaks away like water. That same day, I went to my attorney. I placed the folder on his table. Mark Thompson, after studying the documents, said, "Elena, these are no longer personal matters. These are clear signs of misappropriation of company assets. You are the majority founder. You have the right to demand a full financial report and to call a board meeting. But the main thing is to block the ways for funds to be siphoned off." I asked how. He replied, "Send an official request for documents, demand an end to suspicious transactions, notify the bank of an internal conflict. If necessary, we can petition for injunctive relief." I nodded. I no longer wanted to fight with emotions. Now I trusted only the law. The next day, the first official request was sent to Dave as CEO, with a list of expenses requiring explanation. The second was sent to the bank, asking to strengthen control over transactions due to a conflict among the founders. That evening, Dave called me. His voice no longer held condescension, only anger. "Ellie, have you stooped to this?" I replied, "I am simply exercising my legal rights." He hissed, "Do you want to destroy the company?" I asked in return, "Am I destroying the company? Or is it the one who spends its money to support a mistress?" Dave fell silent, then changed his tone. "You're turning family problems into legal ones." I slowly said, "No, you turned company money into personal funds, and I'm just putting everything back in its place." Hanging up, I took a deep breath. I remembered the day we hung the sign. The name Build Right Partners once warmed my heart. Now it had become a battlefield where I had to save myself. I texted Brenda, "Rest. I'll sort everything out." She replied with one word, "Okay." But I knew that behind that okay lay the fear of a person forced to sign illegal documents. That night, I reviewed all the papers again, arranging them in chronological order. As an auditor, I told myself, an honest person has nothing to fear, but to stand tall, you need roots. My roots were now documents and composure. I was no longer Dave's wife. I was Elena Covington, a founder protecting her money and her dignity, which had been trampled for so long. After sending the official requests, I didn't post anything else online and didn't make calls to exert pressure. I simply made my move and waited. From the outside, it might have seemed that I had become patient again, but in reality, I was letting the situation unfold on its own. Like a crack that water enters, it will widen itself. For the first few days, Dave maintained his confidence. He sent me messages with accusations. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Vengeful woman." I read and didn't reply. I knew that when people run out of arguments, they resort to emotions. On the fifth day, my brother Andrew called. He asked, "Do you need my help?" I replied, "No, I just need extra assurance." Andrew was silent, then said, "Okay, I'll do everything by the book. No one will find fault." Andrew was not one to resolve issues by force. He acted cleanly. One call to the CEO of a major partner company of Build Right Partners. He calmly explained the situation with the internal conflict and the risks regarding payments, advising them to review contract terms for their own security. A short call, without threats, just a sensible business warning. But in business, one word, risk, is enough for people to become wary. That same day, Brenda texted me from a new number. "Major partner has suspended new orders. Panic in the company." I read it, and there was neither joy nor fear in my heart, just a statement of fact. When trust is undermined, money leaves. The next day, the bank sent an official letter demanding clarification on a series of transactions and a plan to ensure financial stability. I knew they had put the company in a high-risk zone, and that meant everything would slow down: loans, credit limits, even payments. For a company with weak working capital, this was like running with a constricted throat. Exactly 1 week later, the domino effect became evident. A message from Dave arrived late at night. There was no more arrogance in it, just one short phrase: "Are you free tomorrow? We need to talk." I understood that the wind had changed, but I replied reservedly, "Communicate through my attorney." In the morning, one of the old suppliers called. "Ellie, we heard you're having problems, so now we only ship goods on prepayment. Sorry." I thanked him and hung up. That's how business protects itself. The one who creates the risk is to blame. At lunchtime, passing a cafe, I saw several former employees. They sat at one table, tense. One quietly said, "The boss has been angry lately. No money, clients are leaving, and he blames everything on accounting." Another added, "They say this new financial manager can't even read a cash flow statement." I listened but didn't interfere. I felt sorry for the employees. They were just working. They weren't to blame for the boss's games. Discord also began in my former mother-in-law's house. Carol Ann called me. She wasn't screaming, but her voice was icy. "Ellie, honestly, is everything okay with Dave's company?" I replied, "And in what capacity are you asking?" She hesitated. I'm asking to know what to do. I understood that. What to do? When the wallet is threatened, people start to think. In the evening, Nick texted. The whole family is now cursing Veronica. Everyone is blaming each other. Dad has completely given up. I felt a pang of pain at the words about his father. He was once again in the center of the storm, paying for others' sins. A couple of days later, Nick texted again, I'm leaving, renting an apartment, going to work on a project in another city. I can't breathe in this house anymore. I replied, do as you think best. You owe me nothing. I wrote this sincerely. Amidst all this chaos, he was the only one who didn't use me for his own gain or accusations. That night, I sat in silence and thought, Veronica wanted to drown me in mud, not knowing that I had long stood on a solid foundation of documents and laws. And from that foundation, I could no longer be moved by a couple of blurry photographs. On the day I was called to give a statement, I no longer trembled. The fear of a betrayed woman had long passed. Only weariness remained. My attorney told me a simple thing. Tell the truth. Provide evidence. The rest is the investigation's job. Veronica's case was obvious. Messages with threats and demands for money, posts with slander. All of it was enough for the case to take its course. She no longer looked like the glamorous new daughter-in-law. During questioning, she was pale, flustered, and scared. And Dave's story wasn't in belated apologies, but in the accounting records. When partners left and the bank cut off oxygen, he understood that being a CEO wasn't just about wearing nice shirts. The money transferred to Veronica, the bills for her purchases, his mother's expenses, all of it was laid out in one chain. The court case for the division of company shares came later. I sat with a straight back, not looking at Dave. The man who had told me, let's part civilly, now looked exhausted and bewildered. His attorney tried to present everything as a family conflict and a woman's revenge, but the court judges by documents. When evidence is on the table, words are just wind. In the end, my share was confirmed. The court ordered the misappropriated funds to be returned. Build Right Partners, the name that once warmed my heart, was placed into liquidation. The remaining assets went to pay off debts to the bank, employees, and suppliers. Most of all, I felt sorry for the employees. They didn't betray me, didn't insult me, but suffered due to the CEO's mistakes. Robert Sullivan, my former father-in-law, had aged greatly. He wasn't evil. He had simply been silent for too long. One day, he stood in the courthouse corridor and looked at me. His lips trembled, as if he wanted to apologize for his entire family, but in the end, he only sighed. I greeted him. Hello, Mr. Sullivan, as I used to. He turned away, and I saw that his eyes were red. I understood that the price of silence is sometimes higher than the price of evil. Nick moved to another city. Before leaving, he sent me one message. Don't think you were wrong when you decided to stand tall. We were wrong, accustomed to bowing our heads to injustice. I sat for a long time, rereading his words. In a family that saw me as a wallet, he was the only one who saw me as a person. My story ended quieter than one might expect. I recovered my rightful share. I didn't get rich, but I had enough to live with dignity and start anew. I opened a small consulting firm, naming it after myself, Elena Covington Solutions. No one else used my name to embellish their success. Brenda Jackson came to work with me. Every day, I drink tea, manage accounting for small businesses, earn honest money, and sleep peacefully. 6 months later, on a rainy day, I stopped at a traffic light near the market and saw Carol Ann. She was selling lottery tickets, without silk dresses, without expensive handbags, without her imperious voice. She looked up, met my gaze, froze for a moment, and turned away. I didn't get out of the car, didn't say anything. I just sat, watched the rain, and tears streamed down my cheeks. Not from pity, nor from schadenfreude, but from the realization that it was truly over. The reputation she valued more than humanity ultimately became her most painful loss. The lesson I learned from this story is simple. In family life, patience isn't bad, but patience without boundaries turns you into a dumping ground for others' problems. And when your kindness starts to be perceived as an obligation, you need to learn to say no to preserve your dignity. If this story made you think, please give it a like to support the channel. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment below. I value every opinion of yours. Thank you for listening to the end. I wish you health and peace. Goodbye, and see you next time on our channel.